Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the Art Unlocked seminars. My name's Amy Fairley and I am the art officer at the Fergusson Gallery in Perth. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about the building and introducing you to J.D. Fergusson and some of his paintings. The Fergusson Gallery itself is a remarkable structure of sandstone and cast iron. Dating from 1832, it was originally built as Perth's first waterworks. The cast iron dome and rotunda acted as a huge water tank, holding around 146,000 gallons of water. The genius behind the project was Adam Anderson, rector of Perth Academy. The building is a testament to his skill, both as an engineer and as an architect. On completion, the success of the scheme was noted in the local press. This ingenious establishment is now one of the most curious and complete in Britain. The water is now of the purest and finest quality and uninterrupted abundance. By 1862, expansion of the city meant another reservoir was required, which was built at Wells Hill. The waterworks, however, continued as the pumping station for this and subsequent reservoirs until 1965. Now a Grade A listed building, it remains one of Scotland's outstanding industrial monuments. It is the earliest identified example of a cast iron building in Scotland. Recent research suggests that as it predates other early known examples, it may well prove to be the oldest surviving example of a cast iron building in the world. The building's purpose as a waterworks came to an end in 1965, and it fell into disrepair. It was thrown a lifeline in the late 1960s, following a campaign by Perth Civic Trust. After considerable alteration and restoration work had been undertaken, it was transformed into a tourist information office, which opened in 1974. By the early 1990s, however, the building was again redundant. Salvation came when the council offered the building to the J.D. Fergusson Art Foundation, who had been looking for somewhere suitable to house the artist's collection. When Fergusson died in 1961, his widow, the pioneering dancer Margaret Morris, inherited a substantial collection of her late husband's oil paintings, watercolours, drawings, sketchbooks, and sculptures, in addition to numerous letters, photographs, exhibition catalogues, and memorabilia. Realising the future significance of the collection, Morris set about establishing a trust to administer the collection. And in October 1963, the J.D. Fergusson Art Foundation was formed. The Fergusson Foundation collection was the largest and most important holding of Fergusson's work in existence. Loans to major exhibitions were regularly made, but the foundation had no permanent home for the safe storage and display of the collection and its archive. In 1967, the letters, photographs, and newspaper cuttings were deposited on loan in the Special Collections Unit of Glasgow University Library, while many of the watercolours and all of the sketchbooks were deposited on long-term loan at Glasgow Art Gallery and Museum at Kelvin Grove. In 1968, a group of 14 major works from the collection were gifted to the University of Stirling by Margaret Morris. A number of the larger and more important paintings were sent to the Hunterian Art Gallery, Paisley Museum and Art Gallery, the National Trust for Scotland, and Scone Palace, thereby fulfilling the principal aim of the foundation, which was to make Fergusson better and more widely known, and to make his works accessible to the public. With the heightened awareness in the 1970s and 80s of the significance of Fergusson's contribution to Scottish art, the need to find a permanent home for the collection became ever more pressing. In June 1990, 3 Scottish local authorities and 1 university were approached by the foundation and invited to submit proposals if they were interested in being gifted the J.D. Fergusson Art Foundation collection. Perth responded to the call by offering the water tower. The council declined the proposal of money from the sale of 2 paintings, wishing to keep the collection intact, and agreed to employ staff for the gallery as part of its museums and galleries section. The formal gift to the collection was completed in 1991, and the Fergusson Gallery was officially opened in March 1992. Devoted to the work of the Scottish colourist John Duncan Fergusson, the collection includes over 150 of his oil paintings, several thousand works on paper, more than 20 of his sculptures, and an extensive amount of archival material. It is the largest holding of the artist's work in existence. Since opening, many more important additions have been made through purchase and gift. John Duncan Fergusson was born in Leith on the 9th of March 1874, the eldest of 4 children. Shortly before his birth, his parents had moved from Pitnacree near Pitlochry in Perthshire, and in later life, Fergusson placed a great emphasis on his Highland ancestry. His father was Fergusson, spelt with 1 S. His mother had the same maiden name, but spelled with a double S, and Fergusson adopted this spelling, assumedly as he felt it to be more Celtic. Fergusson's love of art as a child was encouraged by his mother, who regularly took him to the Royal Scottish Museum in Chambers Street and the National Gallery on the Mound. On leaving school, he began studying medicine in Edinburgh with the aim of becoming a naval surgeon. However, he failed his second-year exams, allegedly as he spent too much time doodling his professors. This left him free to pursue his artistic career. Fergusson viewed himself as a modern and independent artist from the start. In 1894, he took a studio in Picardy Place at the top of Leith Walk. Although he was accepted by the Trustees' Academy, now Edinburgh College of Art, he dropped out after only a few weeks, disliking the strict discipline and choosing instead to be self-taught. He began regularly visiting Paris from 1897, and this early and sustained contact with France meant that he was one of the most progressive British artists of his time. Fergusson wrote, "I saw the Impressionists in the Salle Calbot, Manet, Renoir, Monet, and the rest. I painted in the Luxembourg Gardens, on the quay and barges. I knew boats. I liked the open air, and the idea of being in an art school didn't suit me at all." Fergusson's work from 1897 onwards reflects a variety of influences, including his contemporaries, James Abbott McNeill Whistler, Arthur Melville, and Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, along with his awareness of the work of the Impressionists. In order to follow in their footsteps, Fergusson began painting outdoors. He converted an old cigar box into a portable paint box, which could hold small panels, paints, and cut-down brushes, with the lid acting as a palette. This allowed him the freedom to capture scenes spontaneously. The collection holds around 20 of these small panels, including this self-portrait from around 1900. It is one of his first studies in oil paint, marking his transition away from watercolour. Fergusson was also influenced by the artist Samuel John Peploe, whom he met around 1900. The 2 artists became great friends and spent many summers together in France. Their attraction to developments on the continent, Paris in particular, was not new. A previous generation of Scottish artists, known as the Glasgow Boys, had also benefited from this exposure. Fergusson closely allied his work with theirs. He singled out the watercolour artist Arthur Melville as his first influence, stating, "His work opened up to me the road to freedom, not merely in the use of paint, but freedom of outlook. Fergusson came to value freedom of choice in life and art above all else, and this guiding principle underlay many of his decisions. Travel was crucial to Fergusson's early development. He undertook visits to Morocco in 1899 and Spain in 1901, following in Melville's footsteps. When not travelling, Fergusson took inspiration from his home country. During the early 1900s, Fergusson displayed a keen interest in portraiture. Many of Fergusson's early portraits were based on his family or himself. As well as being a natural choice for a young artist in training, they allowed him to experiment. This was important as he had rejected any formal training, rebelling against the restrictive nature of academic teaching. This desire to preserve artistic freedom was vital to his career, but his single-mindedness was not without cost. Frank Rutter, the respected critic of the Sunday Times and Art News, was an early champion of Fergusson's and observed that he could have made a lucrative career, moved to London as a portrait painter. However, Fergusson had no desire to sacrifice his freedom of expression for financial gain. Early portraits by Fergusson were developed along conventional lines, showing a keenness to portray a faithful physical likeness of his sitter. However, attention to detail was secondary to creating an overall impression of the sitter. This approach was influenced by the work of the French Impressionists. It also showed a debt to the American artist James McNeill Whistler, whose work Fergusson greatly admired. Several male portraits of around 1900 also reflect an awareness of 17th century Dutch artists such as Frans Hals, in their dramatic use of light and shade. In around 1904, Fergusson embarked on a series of impressive full-length portraits, including this example, which is just shy of 2 meters in height. This and similar examples draw comparisons with works by Manny, Whistler, and John Singer Sargent. The sitter for this work, Jean McConaughey, sat for Fergusson on a number of occasions. The archive contains a number of studio shot photographs of Jean, dressed in a variety of outfits and in the nude, suggesting an intimate involvement between artist and model. Fergusson seemed to confirm this himself in a letter of 1959, in which he refers to Jean as one of his very best memories, teasing, which I'd like to elaborate, but won't. Fergusson's self-taught beginnings were a sign of his artistic independence and underpinned a lifelong anti-academic stance. This later led him to play down the importance of anatomical accuracy, which then formed the basis of an art school training. He explained, "Knowledge of anatomy was what I got as a medical student, and I never thought of it as a means for expressing anything in art." Instead, Fergusson expressed the need for emotional accuracy, declaring that drawing is a matter of expressing form as you feel it. In terms of portraiture, therefore, he tried to convey his feelings about the sitter, to paint their human impression. After settling in Paris in 1907, Fergusson's exposure to the ideas of the Parisian avant-garde was vital to the development of this view. His paintings changed radically as he responded to many new and exciting influences, including an expressionist tendency in art, which encouraged artists to convey their emotions on canvas. Fergusson made the permanent move to Paris in 1907. Like many of his contemporaries, he was attracted by the freedom of outlook and the unique atmosphere found there, which lent itself to the creation of a new and dynamic artistic scene. Naturally sociable, Fergusson took to the bohemian lifestyle with ease, mingling with the other artists, musicians, poets and writers, both day and night in the cafes and bars near his studio. A certain fashion for things new and exotic prevailed in Paris at the time, shown in the extravagant clothing worn by many young women including their oversized hats covered in feathers and flowers. The influence of the ballet Russes, brought to Paris by Diaghilev in 1909, manifested itself in even more extreme dress, such as turbans and harem costumes. Fergusson responded enthusiastically to the sensual and decorative possibilities provided by the colourfully dressed, attractive young women, and he began to develop the entire surface of his canvases in ways which he felt enhanced or complemented the sitter's character. Fergusson's highly personal treatment of the female nude was first developed between 1910 and 1912. He offered no explanation for its dramatic appearance, but the art and ideas which he witnessed firsthand in Paris during the years after 1907 would appear to have been crucial. Fergusson was 36, a mature artist and a well-established member of the Parisian avant-garde, when in 1910 he launched himself into the creation of a series of striking, monumental nudes, of which this, titled At My Studio Window, is one of the first. The bold, forceful character of these works marks the culmination of a style indebted to the work of the Fauves, which Fergusson had been developing since 1907. His use of bright colour, dark outline, and simplified form showed an obvious understanding and sympathy with Fauve aims. Critical attention was immediately focused on these nudes, giving the works a unique importance in terms of British art, which is still recognised today. Having been elected a sociétaire of the Salon d'Automne in 1909, Fergusson's focus on the nude owed much to his awareness of the latest trends in artistic and intellectual circles around him. Picasso's Demoiselles d'Avignon and Matisse's Blue Nude, both of 1907, were exhibited at the Salon d'Automne that year, to which Fergusson himself contributed. The treatment of the nude in paintings such as these made a great impact on artists and helped to establish a general shift away from an academic or anatomically exact treatment. In addition to artistic influence, contemporary philosophy was also of interest. The French philosopher Henri Bergson published his most widely read treatise, Creative Evolution, in 1907. Bergson's ideas on rhythm, creativity, and the interdependency of the arts appealed to Fergusson and his artistic circle. From the writings of Bergson, Fergusson came to develop ideas which he perceived to be relevant to his paintings. His desire to link his work to intellectual thought was unusual, somewhat contradicting his common assertion that the subject was of little concern. In these paintings of 1910 to 1912, the female nude has an essential role. For Fergusson, women came to act as a symbol of Bergson's idea of life force. The models, treated as generalized types rather than individuals, have an anonymity suited to their timeless stature. Fergusson first met the pioneering dancer Margaret Morris in Paris in 1913. Then, aged 22, she ran her own dance school and theatre club in Chelsea and had been invited to perform at the Marini Theatre. She captivated Fergusson, who broke off his relationship with the American artist Anne Estelle Rice in order to be with her. Morris was born in London in 1891 of Welsh and Irish parents. Her father, William Bright Morris, was an artist. However, it was her mother who was convinced of her stage potential. Her precocious talent was recognised at a young age. She started performing professionally from the age of just 3 and received an invitation from Sarah Bernhardt to train with her in Paris. In around 1898, she began taking ballet lessons at the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane under the tutelage of John Dauban. However, she soon developed an awareness of the restrictions of the methods of the classical ballet. Possibly inspired by other 20th century performers, such as Isadora Duncan, Morris envisaged a more natural form of dance, allowing greater ease of movement and freedom of expression. In 1908, she learnt classical Greek movement with Raymond Duncan, Isadora's brother, and came to use this as the foundation for her own training methods. Within 2 years, at the age of 19, she had established her own dance school and theatre club in Chelsea, with the financial help of the playwright John Galsworthy and his wife Ada. Between 1910 and 1913, she toured with her company, becoming both the youngest and first woman actor-manager to perform a royal court season. Following their 1913 introduction in Paris, Morris returned to France to be with Fergusson in December of the same year, by which time he had moved to a small villa in Cap d'Antibes, then a little known and unspoilt area in the south. Reluctantly, Morris returned to London to resume her dance commitments in January 1914, but spent that summer once more in Antibes. Fergusson based much of his subsequent work on her, such as this double portrait titled Summer 1914, which portrays Morris in 2 different poses. One important characteristic of Fergusson's work, particularly from the 1920s onwards, was his tendency to paint from sketches and memories which he had made many years before, as is apparent from the title and date of this painting. Painted in 1934, it depicts the idyllic summer the couple spent together before the outbreak of the First World War. Margaret describes their time together. "I have already raved about my Christmas visit to Antibes, but the wonder of the summer at the Cap d'Antibes passes all description. Fergusson had everything organised, a good supply of charcoal for slow cooking, omelettes and soups. He had hung a hammock in the fig tree, so one could lie in it and pull the ripe figs. Sometimes the early ones dropped on one, overripe. I'm glad to be able to say I did appreciate everything to the full. I remember standing on the tiny balcony and saying to myself, nothing can ever be as perfect as this. How right I was." Between their meetings, Fergusson and Morris exchanged frequent letters, often including sketches for set and costume designs, which Fergusson advised on. Despite Morris's importance as an artist model, that role was superseded by the creative partnership which she formed with Fergusson, and which was based on their shared belief of the interdependence of the arts. From this time onwards, he taught Morris to draw and paint, an interest which Morris was to encourage her dance pupils to pursue. Fergusson was leading an idyllic and artistically rewarding life, painting in the south of France when World War I broke out. Had it not been for this event, his art would have taken an undeniably different direction. The news was a blow, causing him to leave the brilliant light of Antibes for an uncertain future back in the UK. Fergusson was fortunate. He was not involved in active military service during the First World War and avoided the horrors experienced by many of his contemporaries as they fought in the war. Fergusson and Morris settled in London, though for the sake of respectability, they kept separate residences. In London, Fergusson's work focused around Morris and her dance school and club. Fergusson gave art lessons at her school and helped to design the stage sets and costumes for her performances. Morris held a weekly club at the theatre premises, which was frequented by many leading figures of the British avant-garde, including Wyndham Lewis, Jacob Epstein, Augustus John, Ezra Pound, Arnold Bax, the Sitwell and Goossens families, and Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his wife Margaret. Catherine Mansfield and John Middleton Murray were also regular attendees. Contact with this mix of artists, writers, and musicians helped to recreate something akin to the lively bohemian atmosphere that Fergusson had enjoyed in Paris. It was not until 1918 that Fergusson painted subject matter directly relating to the war. In 1918, Fergusson was 44 years old and just within the call-up age. In April 1918, he was given the top grading for medical fitness, but was none too pleased about it as he was due to hold an exhibition at the Connell Gallery in London. The exhibition, in fact, helped Fergusson gain exemption from military service by allowing those on the British War Memorials Committee the opportunity of seeing his work. With the support of P.G. Knowdy, the art critic of The Observer, a 6-week commission was proposed by the Ministry of Information's Propaganda and Record Department. Fergusson was given access to Portsmouth docks to gather material from which to work. He specifically requested a naval posting due to his lifelong love of the sea and boats, and, according to Morris, owing to his dislike of the Army's khaki-coloured uniforms. Fergusson arrived in Portsmouth towards the end of July 1918, and correspondence with Alfred Yockney, the Secretary of the British War Memorials Committee, conveyed Fergusson's enthusiasm for the commission. Fergusson produced a number of Conte and pastel sketches, which he later used as the basis for a series of distinct studio-executed paintings, one of which was this painting, Blue Submarine, Portsmouth Harbour. These works show a new concern for geometry and a more precise, disciplined method of applying paint. The technique of blocking in colour using square-ended brushes in a series of angled strokes owes much to Paul Cézanne. They may also owe something of a debt to the vorticists, some of whom attended Morris's club. Following the war and a time in London and France, Fergusson returned to Scotland in 1939, choosing to settle in Glasgow, which he deemed the most Highland and therefore the most Celtic city. He and Morris settled in a flat overlooking the Botanic Gardens. It was part of a conscious effort made during the last 20 years of his life to emphasise his Scottish origins and to promote Scottish art in general. His return to Scotland brought him into contact with many Scots with similar cultural and nationalist concerns. Fergusson soon set to work invigorating the art scene in Glasgow. He shared certain concerns with other contemporaries who were keen to revive and promote a distinctly Scottish cultural tradition. In terms of the transfer of his ideas, Fergusson's influence on a younger generation of Scottish painters was significant. In his mid-60s, Fergusson was well respected in artistic circles, admired for maintaining his rebel status and remaining largely out with the art establishment. His unorthodox views were valued due to his direct experience of the revolutionary artistic changes which occurred in Paris before 1914. He wrote, "Glasgow at the beginning of the war had no place where an independent artist without money could show his work. The only place to send to was the Glasgow Institute, the old art club with an entrance fee, a yearly subscription of 8 guineas, and a committee that refused to admit anyone they did not consider an important artist was of course out of the question for an artist without any money or a student, however talented. A private show in a dealer's gallery cost £1 a day and printing expenses." In 1940, Fergusson established the new Art Club, where artists, musicians, and writers were encouraged to meet weekly to take part in informal discussions. This was the forerunner of the new Scottish group, of which Fergusson was founder member. The group held exhibitions from 1943 to 1948, and again in 1951, 1953, and 1956. Just like the Salon des Indépendants in Paris, there was no jury selection. The group also allowed women to exhibit. This inclusive approach appealed to many members, including European refugees, Yankel Adler and Joseph Herman. The artists Ian Hamilton Finlay and William Crosby were also amongst the members of the group. Alongside this activity, Morris formed the Celtic Ballet in 1947. Fergusson began work on this ambitious late work during the 1940s. Basing this work, Danu, the Mother of the Gods, on Morris wearing a costume she had designed for a performance with her Celtic Ballet. Fergusson used a second model, Martha Arnott, for the final stages of the portrait, as Morris was too busy with her Celtic ballet to sit for him. Fergusson's overriding enjoyment of colour is still very much evident in his later works. He exploited the decorative potential of glowing pinks and reds and adopted a more tightly structured approach to each composition. In turn, the quality of his paint became drier, and in contrast to the free, spontaneous technique employed in many of his earlier works, he began to work in a slower, more methodical way. According to Fergusson, this canvas had lain blank in his studio for some 20 years, waiting for the inspiration of something special and mystical to paint on it. Fergusson strongly believed that the Celtic peoples were the most creative. He stressed the importance of his own Highland roots and claimed his own inherent Celticism in his later works. Fergusson's ideas and desire to promote Scottish art generally continued the spirit of the Scots Renaissance, led by the writer and poet Hugh MacDiarmid during the 1920s and 30s. Fergusson collaborated on a project with MacDiarmid, providing illustrations for his poem In Memoriam James Joyce in 1955. In conclusion to today's talk, it must be said that Fergusson's contribution to 20th century Scottish art cannot be overstated. He was the only major British artist directly associated with and responding to the events going on in Paris in the years preceding the First World War. A true pioneer and champion of independent artists, when he died at home in Glasgow in 1961, his achievements were overshadowed by those of a younger generation, a generation whom, without Fergusson, may not have felt emboldened to experiment and take the risks they did with their art. I think we'll maybe just end there, and I just want to say thank you again for Art UK for hosting the event tonight, and thank you for coming along and listening to me ramble on about the Fergusson Gallery and Fergusson's works. Please do come and visit us when we reopen in April, and hopefully we'll see many of you there. Thanks again. Thank you.